firstly, welcome, and let's talk about you first. So, who are you, and how did you get here from sunny almost Tauranga in New Zealand?
Hey, good morning, James. I'm so thrilled to be here today. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to spend a bit of time talking about ARPCO. First, a little bit about me, though, I guess. I'm a Taranaki girl, born and bred. I'm an Otago graduate, and I now live in Tauranga, as you've said, but it's been a long road to getting here. I spent the bulk of my career working for a company based in Silicon Valley, and lived and worked in Europe across 3 countries, I think, France, Germany and the UK over time, and then spent about 10 years in the US, filling a number of different roles. Trimble is founded on GPS technology, and back in the early days we were really educating the market about what GPS was and how it could be used in a commercial sort of context. And so I cut my teeth there. I was employee about number 400, I think, and over 20-something years, we went from 80 million in revenue to about 2.5 billion. And by the time I left, there were 7,500 employees. So I learned about scale and growth, about being a public company, the discipline required there, about team culture, about the application of technology and the way it can change the world, and all those things kind of come together for what I'm doing now. So here I am in Tauranga. I've been back here now about 7 years and absolutely love it.
So how does someone in New Zealand end up in Silicon Valley working for a high growth tech company? It's sort of, you're describing perhaps every 23-year-old's dream. I'm not sure what stage of your career you ended up going over there, but a lot of people say luck has a lot to do with it, but also timing, etc. How did you get the journey to make it to there?
Well, luck has a lot to do with it, and as it so happens, my husband was working for a tiny little Christchurch-based software company, and they relocated him to France to establish the French market for the software way back when. And at the end of the year that we were there, a year in which I could not work, it was a fairly tough year. I didn't speak the language. There was no internet. I used to wait for a letter from my mum every Tuesday, and I used to write back. We used to print 2 sets of photos, and I'd send one home to New Zealand, and it would do the rounds of the family. So, it was pretty early on. I learned a lot of things being in that space for 12 months. But at the end of that year, Trimble acquired the company my husband was working for, and he was transferred to the UK. And after a year of not working, I needed to work, and so I sort of pushed my way a little bit into a job with Trimble, and I was a jack of all trades, and I did whatever was needed, supporting the New Zealand company's expansion into Europe. And after a year or so, we came back to New Zealand, and I was fortunate enough to score a job working for the New Zealand sales team, and then expanded from there. So carved my own path, and my husband's actually just left Trimble after 34 years, so it's been a while, and it's been a big part of our family. But that was how I ended up working for a Silicon Valley company.
As you say, sometimes a year of reflection and difficulty can often lead to some good things, but I'm sure it didn't feel like that at the time when you were probably writing to your mum that things were pretty stressful. You wanted to come back to New Zealand, and you hated it over there, even though you didn't really want to hate it.
I really did, but we ended up with 2 little French children, and culturally, it was really game changing. We just learnt so much as a family unit, and became quite tight knit. And I got enough language to be dangerous. I think I built resilience, the ability to just survive really tough times, being so far away from home, and really with limited resources at that period of history. And so, it's had a massive influence on how I kind of cope with things these days. COVID was painful, but not that bad.
And then now you've been in New Zealand 7 years, you say, and would love to talk about, perhaps a bit later around what you're doing outside of UBCO to support the I guess the startup community, because I know you're doing a lot of advising and sitting on boards and helping new companies. But how did you meet the UBCO team? Because as with many of these startups, and it's a well-trodden route, you have the founders, but then they need, I guess, to professionalize and go from a concept to a company. How did you meet the founders, and what was the journey you went on to become CEO?
So I came back to New Zealand and carried on working in my corporate role for about a year, and did something like 200,000 air miles. And the only person I got to know locally was the woman at Tauranga Airport who used to check us in and check us out. So, I was really tired and just no energy to connect into the local community. So after 12 months, I decided it was time to call it. And I got a job with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and spent a year there getting to understand the New Zealand ecosystem, to support local businesses and just network. And I'd never really worked in the New Zealand context. I'd always, even when I was based onshore, I'd always had a very global sort of outward-looking view of business. And so I needed to learn what business was all about in New Zealand, and NZTE was an amazing place to do that. But I was a little bit of a rebel perhaps, and felt the need to do my own thing. So I ended up out in a bit of a consulting gig and supporting a number of companies across the technology ecosystem. I could see then the potential for what New Zealand could offer the world. And I think from an invention standpoint, just lots of amazing invention happening here, but perhaps a little bit limited in our ability as Kiwis to commercialise and to take on the world in a really big way. And I'm a really big thinker. I left a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was, part of an executive team leading a billion-dollar business unit within that sort of context. And so big is kind of what I'm all about, and getting to big in an organised and structured and intentional way. And so I wanted to sort of help New Zealand invention to be what it could possibly be offshore. And that was really the start of it. And at the time, I also got to plug into the investment ecosystem, and part of that was the angel network. And I didn't have a clue what angel investment was back in 2014, but I ended up joining Enterprise Angels here in Tauranga, and UBCO was one of the first, if not the first company that I saw pitch. And what excited me about that, James, was here in this little tiny part of the world in Tauranga where I decided to settle, was a company building a product, a physical product, which I really love. Hardware is something, that I love to do. Technology-centric, environmental focus in terms of doing good for the planet, and with aspirations to take on the world. And so I wrote a small check. I supported the team early on, rolling my sleeves up, doing some early recruitment, plugging into my global network to the degree that it made sense at that point, and supporting the development of sort of go-to-market strategy. And over the course of the next sort of 5 or 6 years, advised the board, joined the board, ended up chairing the board. And when the founding CEO decided to step aside last year, I stepped in as interim, but within a month decided that I'd found my place and my purpose, and here we are.
Sounds almost too good to be true. So what a great journey into moving back and getting involved in the community, to leading a company that you really have the same value system as the company does. So that's a pretty remarkable story, but probably on the back of 30 years of pretty hard graft before that to get to that place.
I think so. I mean, I'm definitely older and wiser, and probably allocate my time more effectively these days. I don't get so stressed. Things don't worry me as much as they used to, and so that's quite useful in the context of a startup where it's, it can be pretty stressful. Just getting things right. We have a young team. I'm by far the oldest. I'm pretty sure on our payroll. So, a bit of maturity and the experience of time is, I think, quite useful at this stage.
So let's talk about UPCO, Catherine. I know about it because I do get a few Domino's pizzas delivered. No, I am joking, but I'm not joking. Of course, I get Domino's pizza delivered. But for those that aren't in this sort of electric bike sector, they may or may not know the company. Others will know it very well, given the branding is just absolutely beautiful. So why don't we start from the start and tell us what it is, where it came from, what the story is behind the company.
Sure. So UPCO today is an electric adventure vehicle company. And that's not quite the origin of the company, but we've found a niche in the electric adventure space that's pretty exciting, and we have the potential to really expand into that space over the next several years. Electric adventure is really a broad category of terrain vehicles, and there's a number of brands that play in that space, but we're quite unique in what we do. The origins of the story are really interesting in that the founders had this concept of an electric farm bike. And those of your listeners who know about farming and field days have probably seen UPCO over several years in that sort of context. But in 2014, the guys entered the prototype of the bike, I think they called it the Steed or something like that, into the innovation competition at field days. And they won. And so the prize money was development of brand and some support around commercialisation provided by Timothy Allen, who became the third co-founder of the business. Daryl and Anthony had been in the electric bicycle space for a long time. They'd been electrifying or converting bikes to e-power over a long time, and they had quite strong connections into supply chain up in China, so they had that sort of value. And Tim brought commercialisation, sort of deep market research and branding, marketing sort of capability. And so the combination of the three of them at that stage was really, really powerful. I think what's interesting too is that there's this rich history of motorcycle development in New Zealand, and what lots of people don't know is that Johnny Callender back in 1963, good Taranaki boy, invented the farm bike. He was an engineer but had farm property in Taranaki and developed this motorcycle that was worked on the farm. And then from there you've got Burt Munro in 67, Land Speed Records, and all the stories that go along with Burt Munro. In the 90s, John Britton and that amazing motorcycle that he developed. I think there were only 10 produced, and what remains are in museums these days. And then fast forward to the sort of 2000s, and here we have the UPCO 2x2, an electric bike designed for farm. And, it's evolved to what it is today. We're at 5th generation. We've learned a lot by being on farm, working with farmers, doing work with farmers day in and day out. It's a super tough environment to have a product that can endure a New Zealand dairy farm. And it's really been the work that's gone in and around the design and engineering associated with the learning. In that context, that enables us to do what we do today in the adventure space. So there's a bit of history for you, James. And
then it's an interesting start because it starts on the farm. Without being overly cheesy, it's sort of the number 8 wire type of Kiwi ingenuity. And now when you look at who your main customers are, at least initially, it's farmers, absolutely, but it's also and it's how you describe yourself. In terms of describe UPCO, it's the adventure seekers. So it's people not on the farm that are using UPCO bikes, how is that eventuated? Is this a new thing? Is this a COVID catalyst and people are getting out into nature, or is this something to do with a population that's moving towards a more flexible work-life balance? How has that developed over time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, first and foremost, the majority of our customers are rurally based. And so, and about half of them are farmers. I think we'll see that number diminish a little bit over time relative to market size. But I think always our customers have been having adventures. I like to call them mini adventures. Every time you get on the 2x2, you're out there having an adventure, and that's whether you're farming or you're using your farm bike to go hunting, or you take it fishing, that sort of thing. And so we put the product out into market really early on. So, before we'd solved any of the sort of design and engineering problems, really, it was out there being tested and used, and we allowed people to use it however they wanted to. And that's given us insight into a range of use cases that we never really imagined possible. So, I mentioned hunting and fishing. You've got the farmer who takes it, attaches the gun rack to the side for his weekend hunt, or the fishing rack or the surfboard rack to the side of it. The exposed frame enables you to attach things. I think there's 17 different points of attachment on the frame of the vehicle, and so the ability to put it to whatever use you might want, and people are attaching all sorts of different things to it. But what that really showed us was that there's a range of uses, again, that we'd never really thought of. And so you had more and more people using it off-road, taking it off-farm, taking it into the forest. We had conservation workers who were doing track maintenance, and Department of Conservation here in New Zealand. We've got Catalina Island Conservancy using it for those types of applications, and and then those people are taking it at the weekends when they're not working into sort of more off-road adventure type use cases. What we identified when we first went into the US was that the American customer is actually quite a lot different than the Kiwi or even the European. We used to call ourselves the electric utility vehicle company, and it was really this utilitarian set of use cases, multi-uses that people had. Again, the farmer, hunter, fisher type of thing. In the US, people tend to have a lot of toys, and they'll use their toy for one use. And so we find now a lot of our customers have got multiple two-wheel vehicles. They might have a road bike and all the gear that goes with that for being out cycling on the road. And they might have an e-bike or a mountain bike, or both. They might have a high-performance, high-speed on-road motorcycle. And the 2x2 sort of fits in between. We're a moped classified vehicle. We only do 50 kilometres an hour, or 45 k's in Europe. And so we don't go that fast, but we can get to places that you can't go with any of those other types of vehicles that I just explained. And so we're finding that there's a use case in the United States in particular that is adventure only. And what we're seeing is that people of about your age or a little bit older are wanting to perhaps get back into riding out on the trails, or getting off-road and having fun. They might have been a bit more risk averse for the last decade or so. Their partner mightn't have allowed them to be on a motorbike. And what we're finding is that it's often a woman that will make the decision that she and her partner can both ride this bike. They're doing it together, and if there's teenage kids involved, they'll buy some extras for the kids, and they can have family time too. So we're getting into this kind of family adventure context that is opening up all sorts of doors for us. The approachability of the vehicle too. People have never ridden before even, or as I say, people who haven't ridden for a long time can get on this amazing 2x2 and get out there and have mini adventures or big adventures and be wearing the Abco grin really quickly, after just being on it for a few minutes.
So the biggest success with electric vehicles, or perhaps biggest success, perhaps most well-known success with electric vehicles is Tesla in the wider electric vehicle market. And I guess the discussion amongst families when they should make that purchase and this is for the main car, so perhaps it's slightly different, but it's all around the technology and the battery technology, how long between charges, how long am I going to be able to drive for? What are the stats of Abco, and is that part of the, I guess, unique identifiers of Abco is around that technology and battery, and how has that been developed? Because that's probably the hardest part, perhaps, that in supply chain.
Yeah, so the vehicle itself, we talk about it being a motorbike, but it's really an intelligent platform. It's fully software connected. We can update firmware over the air. It comes with an app, so you can manage speed, and over time, there'll be more and more capability that will be able to be managed that way. You've got full telemetry capability and that sort of thing. So it really is a totally different use case, but a version of Tesla type technology where it comes down to an individual experience and optimizing for that. Battery technology is an interesting one. We have a partnership with a company out of California called Chemix, and they're developing cobalt-free battery technology and using artificial intelligence to really narrow in on a particular rider and provide the optimum use or the optimum experience for that rider. And we're really excited to be working with them on that technology. Getting away from cobalt's a great thing too, so we're super happy about that. But when you're a consumer brand and
can you go into that a little bit about the cobalt and why that's a good thing for us that perhaps are a little bit less
sure.
electric battery knowledgeable?
Any sort of mineral extraction, I suppose, is not great, but cobalt's a particularly bad one, and there's a lot of negative connotations in and around the extraction of cobalt, the way that it's done, the people that are doing it, how much they're paid, all those sorts of things. It's just not great. And so if we can move away from that, it's a good thing, not just for the planet and humanity, but it moves us further along in terms of advancement of customer experience as well. So we hit on all those things. We're pretty happy about that.
So we were talking about just the technology and that battery provision. What are the stats for the bike? Is it it's 50 k's an hour, but what about how long can I ride for? And what's the demand for
You'll get 70 to 100 kilometres. It really depends on the terrain. It depends on how much you weigh, what you're carrying on the vehicle. And so, 70 to 100 is pretty reliable, and a 4 to 6 hour battery charge time. So you can just plug it into the wall. We just have ours out in the garage and we plug it into the wall when we get home. Keep the battery above 50% charged is ideal, and you won't see deterioration if you're looking after it in that way. And 70 to 100 k's is actually quite a distance. So the average farmer does 10 or so k's a day, so it puts it in context.
Really?
For that type of use case. Yeah,
that's an interesting stat. One of our listeners has asked, is there any reason why it's limited to moped classes, and is there thought about going sort of wider to, I guess that's obviously coming from someone that rides motorbikes and likes to go faster, but what I guess that's a leading question into what's the product plan. You've got the two that you've just released, which is one more, I guess, is it on-road or utility, one certainly more farm bike, work bike. Is there other products that the team are working on?
Yeah, there's lots of questions in there, James, so let me see if I can knock them all off. Today we have two products. We have the adventure vehicle and 2x2. It's fully decked out for the road. It's road registerable, and so it comes with a dashboard, speedo, indicators, mirrors so you can see what's behind you, a place for the license plate on the back of it. The advantage of 50 kilometres an hour and being a moped rather than a motorcycle is that you can drive it with a car licence, and so you don't need to go and get any specialist motorcycle licence to do that, which is for a lot of people a real obstacle actually. So we have an advantage with that, and I mentioned teenagers before. Learner's licence is actually okay in a lot of jurisdictions. There are some countries of the world and some states within some countries, Australia being one of them, where you do require a motorcycle licence for a moped, but for the broad range of locations that we operate in, that works. And then we have, so that's the white Adventure 2x2. You can choose different types of tyres. You can ride on the road, but you can also ride off-road, and that's the beauty of the vehicle. Designed for off-road, but able to ride on-road and be registered for on-road. We also have the black work bike, so that's a stripped-down version, and that really came from requests from those who only wanted to use it off-road. Lots of users wanting to use it only on farm. No wing mirrors, no dash, a slightly different headlight, no indicators, and you can still do the same things on the app. You can put a mobile phone holder, at the front there and use that as a speedo as an alternative. But it's stripped down. In the New Zealand context, it's about $1,000 less than the one that's kitted out fully for the road. You can't register it. In terms of what's coming, yes, we are looking at speed. There's been a lot of requests for higher speed, and we have our what some of your listeners might have seen online, the FRX1, our project Sage, which is due out in FY24, and that will do somewhere in the realm of 80 kilometres an hour. More of a dirt bike. We expect a younger demographic who's wanting to get off-road and have fun in the dirt, and compete with a number of other off-road dirt bike type products that are out there already. To be able to register it for the road and take it on road, and I think there'll be a mix of use cases in and around that too, but it is addressing the higher speed request that we've had over time, and those who are a bit more thrill seeking than perhaps I am. Not sure about you, James, but
no, I'm with you on the 50k now. I love it.
50k suits me just
sounds
fine.
Good to me.
Yeah.
Catherine, with any product development, this is a great lead into, I guess, the next topic of any startup, and one that's developing hardware it's certainly, almost one of the most important parts is supply chain, and then that really rolls into UBCO and funding. So funding doesn't come cheap when it's hardware, because especially when it's technology and hardware, because you need some big brains around the technology. You also need to have manufacturing and those sorts of operations in place. How well supported is a New Zealand startup, and how have you gone? You in terms of raising capital, and what are the challenges that you've been facing compared to, say, maybe what you've witnessed overseas and in the US and the ease of capital perhaps, or the perception of the ease of capital in the US is much greater. What's the ecosystem in New Zealand like? Lots there to unpack, but let's go with what you've seen in UBCO.
Well, I'd say first and foremost, hardware is really hard, and I think we're a tiny country way down in the bottom of the South Pacific, and our markets, when we think globally, are a long way away. You're even 3.5 hours kind of flight away from key centres in Australia. So it is certainly challenging. As I mentioned early on, Daryl and Anthony had really solid supply chain connections and relationships up into Asia, and they were quite well advanced, but very focused on bicycles. So over time, we've evolved the supply chain to be much more automotive centric, and that's been work in progress over years, and that's taken lots of relationship building and lots of research, and still very Asian centric, but there's other parts of the world that supply into the product now too. We built a business, and honestly, it's the number 8 wire, Kiwi ingenuity, determination, and thriftiness. I think that got us a really long way. And we've been evolving the 5th generation of the product, but we've actually been a 5th generation now for a good couple of years, and so that speaks volumes to the work that was done by the early team, and a really, really tiny team as well. I think we had one guy in Taiwan at that point who was supporting our Asian supply chain and manufacturing. So we manufacture in China, Taiwanese-based contract manufacturer, but the game changer has been the introduction of a company called TPK, which is a publicly listed company out of Taiwan. They've been one of the world's, if not the world's, largest producer of touchscreen technology and supplying household names in that context for a long time. But they've been diversifying into EVs and alternative transportation over the last few years, and we got lucky in meeting them sort of early last year. They invested into the company from an equity standpoint, and we've been working with them to evolve our supply chain and sort of manufacturing capability to the point where we'll be able to work with them to produce thousands of units per month versus the smaller sort of batch production that we've been doing previously. We're now at rolling production, but still at very small volumes. The TPK relationship will take that to another level. And we've recently signed supply chain and production line agreements with them to take us forward. So where we were not able to really answer the question well about how does a little tiny startup from New Zealand scale production, this is truly game changing and takes us to a whole nother level in terms of what we'll be able to do. And longer term, I think, support us to have in-market manufacturing for the product, which can help us avoid tariffs, be closer to customers, just improve supply overall for customers, and ultimately that customer experience, which is super important for us.
And how has the New Zealand ecosystem helped or hindered that growth? Because I guess the question is maybe more direct. Has the government policies in New Zealand enabled you to do what you've done, or have you been able to do what you've done despite it all? And what do you want to see change in the New Zealand context so you've got more support to grow? Because UBCO is one of many companies trying to do manufacture or design or invent in New Zealand and grow offshore. It's hard anyway, but is enough being done to help you?
So I think, there's a few different angles from government support perspective. Some are great and some are not so great. On the subsidy side, focus has been on 4-wheel vehicles. and carbon emission reduction, which are good things to be focused on, but it doesn't really help us much. We reduced carbon in the context of a farmer using our vehicle instead of a combustion engine vehicle, but not by massive amounts. It starts to look different when you're replacing quad bikes and larger passenger type vehicles. So we've not benefited from that. Where we have benefited from is amazing support from Callaghan Innovation and very specifically from NZTE, have been incredible. Prior to COVID, the support we had through our customer manager and the International Growth Fund grants, in-market support, beachhead advice, just, pick a country that you're looking to, or that you might be thinking about entering from a market standpoint, and pretty certain NZTE's got someone there. So, they've been amazing. And then during COVID, their rapid pivot in support of businesses and the reshaping of IGFs, certainly in our North American context, they've been incredible.
That's a really positive response to a question that's often replied to with quite negatively. But it sounds like NZTE really has their focus sorted out in terms of helping companies get overseas if they need it.
I really do think they do an outstanding job, and I'm not biased because I worked there for a year. I certainly know how to leverage it, but independently of that, I think they're incredible. And ABCO's a great company for NZTE to be promoting. You've got this cool looking product, and we look great in videos and that sort of thing. I was fortunate to be part of the Prime Minister's trade mission to the US recently, and NZTE played a big part in that, and just seeing the organisation that went into the events that we attended, and the overall itinerary was mind blowing. NZTE was very much behind that. So yeah, I'm a big supporter and proponent. I think they do a great job, and perhaps don't get the credit that they should.
And what about the general private market funding support? Do you find that I know you're going through some, or you're a startup and growth company, or I guess you've moved from startup to sort of more growth, and lots of funding is required all the time. Are you getting the support in New Zealand from investors, and what's the journey look like to that, and what's your thought about, say, listing on the stock market or something like that?
We've had amazing support from the New Zealand ecosystem. GD1 Fund 2 was an early, or was our first venture capital investor back in 2018, and we've had great support from GD1 subsequently. Those things take work. It's all about people, James, and getting to know people and building trust and in one-to-one relationships in the product and the business, and and the team overall, and your capability to be able to take things on. We've had great support over time from the angel community. They came in early on, and have continued to support, as has Snowball as a platform, been an absolutely outstanding partner for ABCO. We bought Nuance Connected Capital in last year. And, the support from NZGCP into those organisations, GD1 and Nuance both, having benefited from, the big fund, that all helps. New Zealand Growth Capital Partners, so that's the government's, the fund of funds, I think they called it last year, the 300 million in the Elevate Fund. There's also the Aspire Fund, of which ABCO was a beneficiary sort of early on. It was called something else back then, NZVIF, I think, way back, recently rebranded. But, that all makes a difference. But I think, in my experience, hardware takes a lot more convincing. There's a lot more risk. As you've said, we've got supply chain. It's not, software development is not easy, but it's relatively easy. You can ship your product for free, across borders, over the wire, if you like. And so, we've got not just supply chain challenges in and around availability of components, and TPK brings heft to that challenge, and that we can leverage their scale on the component side and building relationships with suppliers, that kind of thing. But we've also got to ship product, and there's not that many ships on the water, and containers are all in the wrong places, and the cost of shipping has just gone through the roof. And then you have tariffs that come into the mix. So early on in COVID, in our COVID life, the Trump administration imposed tariffs to the degree of 25% on imports coming in from China, and we had a boat or a container sitting on a boat off the coast of Oregon, and overnight tariffs went from something like 7 or maybe even less % to 25. It nearly killed us. When you've got this massive tariff bill that you've got to pay before you can bring your product onshore and ship it off to customers. So you got the complexity of all of that to deal with too. And so I think from an investment standpoint, that can be quite off-putting when there's all of that to deal with. And software is a much more straightforward proposition. I'd argue it's not half as exciting, and these people out there in the world, and the ABCO team is no different. We have been able to recruit in talent beyond the TPK relationship that enables us to do all of this stuff really well. I've recruited in some of the best people that I've worked with over time on the supply chain and operations side to support us in that way. We've got the most amazing engineers developing our product. We've got capability across the board in New Zealand, in the US, and in Europe and in Asia that are second to none in what they do. And hardware's been around for a long time, and so I think there's potential for us to do this and do it really well from here, and we're out there proving it. So watch this space.
And an opportunity for people to invest along the journey as well at different stages, whether it's...
Absolutely right. And so, we've been consistent and, and continuing to open up for prior investors, to keep on the journey. Snowball, again, we're open on the Snowball platform at the moment with a convertible note offer. We're always wanting to talk to people who are interested in supporting a New Zealand company on this journey. But certainly longer term, we see ourselves as a listed company. Time frame wise, it's kind of anyone's guess, I guess. But in terms of readiness, we've recently recruited a Silicon Valley very experienced CFO who's been through this process before, and a number of times, and thinks that we're in really good shape relative to other companies that he's worked with too. So, I think we could be, ready within 18 months to list if that's the right thing to do. But in the meantime, we're looking to raise another 30 million before the end of this year if we can, in order to support 2 years of runway and really give us optionality around, what we do next. We've got product that we want to develop. We've got market expansion, particularly in North America, that we want to continue to do. And when you're continuously raising capital, that can be a distraction from, getting on and doing those things. So we'd really like to, to be able to nail this raise and close the round and get focused on what it is we do best, which is build amazing adventure vehicles and, expand that product line and the customer base.
Well, Catherine, the journey sounds really exciting. And as you said, can't help it but think hardware is cool. And when you go on your website, as someone that is not a experienced motorbike enthusiast, as people can probably just see from looking at me, it's even exciting for those sorts of people, because it really does open up a potentially a pathway to think about getting onto the two-wheel journey, and all from in this new technology of electric vehicles. It kind of ticks both boxes.
Absolutely right. I think longer term though, and I mean, you mentioned pizza delivery, and I won't ask you how many Domino's pizzas you've had delivered on an Upco 2x2, but we've been in an extended pilot with Domino's here in New Zealand for several years now, and there's more than 70 vehicles in that fleet, and kind of growing. So we really understand what they need and how they're doing it. But it's
on that. Is that cost driven because it lowers cost of delivery because of petrol costs, or is that ESG driven, or is it a bit of both? Why are they?
A bit of both. From a total cost of ownership standpoint, the Upco 2x2 really checks all the boxes. It's not the least expensive product to be delivering pizzas on, sort of out of the box, excuse the pun. But in the context of that sort of cost over the lifetime of the product ownership, it is really meaningful. You've got lower cost of fuel, of course. You're less than $1 a charge. You can do 70 plus kilometres on the vehicle, so that's quite a few pizza deliveries within 5 kilometres of a pizza store. They generally have a spare battery to cover them while they're charging, and to make sure that they don't run out, of course. But the cost of servicing is really, really low. It's been one of the challenges for automotive dealers to get their heads around moving from traditional combustion engine vehicles to electric, because there's not really much that can go wrong. There's not a lot under the hood, and so the same applies in this context too. On a typical, I can't quote food delivery specifically, but in a farm context, you're paying anything upward of a quarter of the cost of a two-wheel farm bike in servicing each year in the combustion engine sort of context, whereas with ours it's again next to nothing. You might go through some brake pads, and there's a few things that need to be sorted. You might break some spokes and need some new tyres, but it's relatively low key, and so that makes a difference. But what we've got going with Domino's here in New Zealand, and this is a sort of an experiment too, in terms of what we might do globally in future, is subscription. And so they pay us on a monthly basis. We retain ownership of the vehicle through the lifetime of the product, and that gives them certainty around that cost of ownership. So they're paying for charging, less than $1 a charge, but we cover all the servicing, replace the battery if it needs replacing, and just recently actually replacing quite a number of the fleet vehicles with the latest generation of bikes. So that's working well, and I think it raises another point around New Zealand as an R&D sort of environment for us. Not just for product development, where we have our 2x2 R&D centre, but we have a centre of excellence for agriculture. So we're working really closely in the agricultural context here in New Zealand to understand the market, what the farmers really need, what's happening in viticulture, what's happening in crop farming, and how can we provide an amazing customer experience in and around our product, and then take that to the world. We can test business models like subscription. We can test other vertical markets, whether that be tourism or food delivery, or a range of other things. And we can do that in a market where we're only a phone call or two away from someone who can help us out. We're only a handful of kilometres away from our customers in most cases, and that works really, really well. And it's just a great place to learn how to do business in a meaningful way, and then take it offshore and scale it up. So you'll see more and more of that from Upco here out of New Zealand.
Well, Catherine, what a great place to pause and look. Thank you so much for sharing the journey. It is really exciting and sounds like a lot of work. I feel somewhat fatigued thinking about it, but what an awesome opportunity, and congratulations to you and the team for getting to this point. But it sounds like there's some great successes ahead. So we wish you all the very best for your journey.
Oh, thanks so much, James. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and look forward to seeing you on a 2x2 before too much longer.
Absolutely. The scary thing about electric vehicles these days is you can go on the website and press buy now. So it's extremely easy to do. So let's see what happens. But I'll certainly be keen to have a go.
Yeah. For anyone interested, avco.com. You'll find all that you need to know there. Thanks, James.
Great. Thanks. Have a great week, Catherine.
Yeah, you too. Bye.